Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and happy Pride Month to everyone. This podcast is all about inclusivity, whether it be ski, snowboard, inline, skateboard, scooter, hell, even soap shoes are welcome here. And that's because we're all the same. Sure, some of us like 2 skis, some of us like 8 wheels, some of us like dicks, some of us like boobs, but you know what? All of us are the same, regardless what we like. It's 2023, and if you're still living with a closed mind, well, I'm embarrassed for you. I don't know why I felt compelled to say all this at the start of the episode. Actually, I do know why. Because there are too many people in this world that are ridiculed for what they were born into, or ridiculed for what they love to do. It's bullshit. And if you disagree with this opinion, well, there are plenty of other podcasts out there for you. And I will say, while this wasn't planned, my guest this week is one of the most open-minded people I know. On top of that, he's smart as a whip, he has gigantic balls, and the calm demeanor of a yogi. I'm talking about the legendary airman Julian Carr. Julian is famous for record-setting cliffs and a whole lot more, and this podcast is such an interesting one. But before I get into it, I want to ask you to tell a friend about the show, share my social posts, and rate me wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps the show grow, and it's greatly appreciated by me. Finally, I only work with the best brands, and I'd love for you to listen to their ads and buy their products. The brands I'm talking about are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Rollerblade, Stanley, Elon Skis, and High Cascade Snowboard Camp. Now, let's talk with Julian Carr. I want to start everything out by asking you random questions about a few interesting things that I've heard about you, and I'm not going to ask you about your hair that goes down to your calves. I'm going to start out with, is it true that you've peeled all of the oranges in your life in one full peel?
Great question. Yes, my dad taught me that. It was a valuable life lesson that every orange can be peeled in one peel, and we practiced my whole childhood on all our hikes together. So yeah, it's definitely an art form that I have a lot of pride in.
And then is it true that playing ping pong, no one has ever seen you lose?
That was true for a while. It is not true anymore. I've met some serious skilled players in my day. So no, I'm not the top dog on the ping pong table anymore, but I'll still give you a good run for your money.
When I think of people that are really good at ping pong, it's like one of those things that doesn't come out until a ping pong table shows up. And then someone just shows this natural skill that they have, and it's usually a crazy talented person. Are there other things that you have like supreme ability with other than ping pong? Like secret talents that people may not know about?
I got some really weird things I'm pretty good at. Like I can take 2 sharp kitchen knives straight from the kitchen drawer or straight from the chef in the back of a restaurant, and I can flip both of them. 720 at the same time, both hands.
Huh.
I've even done them with the knives on fire. I don't know, weird stuff like that. I love coordination tests. I've always been into being like symmetrical too. So I can shoot like 3-pointers with my left hand, no problem, on the basketball court. I could do quite a few things left-handed. I was ambidextrous till I was 9 years old, and then I broke my left arm and became right-hand dominant. But I still get a kick out of just doing strange coordinated stuff like that.
All right. And then is it true that you and 2 of your best friends, Parker Cook and Billy Poole, are on a rap record? What's the story behind that?
I don't know where you found that info. I have a faint recollection of that, but the one thing that Billy, me, and Parker did together is we invented the boomerang drink that you can get at the Sits up at Alta. So anytime you go up there, order a boomerang. Me, Billy, and Parker sat down and came up with that one back in the day.
And the last thing I'm going to ask you about, I believe you and I met in South America around maybe 2005 or something like that. And there was a term that you and your crew invented down there that needs explaining. What is a Chilean diaper?
All right. So this one comes from also Parker and Dash Long. It's more just like when you're skiing deep snow and suddenly you're jumping off everything. It feels like you're in the POW all day and you're getting after it. And that's just the term we came up with, if you're getting after it. And I don't know where it came from. It probably doesn't make sense to anybody except for us 3.
Fair enough. And you start out in diapers in Salt Lake City. And I ask way too many questions about the church. I don't think you're part of the church, but what's your strangest Mormon encounter?
I don't really think I have any. I wasn't born and raised Mormon. My mom's side of the family actually was pretty religious in the Mormon church. So a lot of my extended family was Mormon. And, ever since I was tiny, we'd go celebrate our Thanksgiving and Christmas at my aunt's house, aunt and uncle, and be, a really Mormon family. So I think I just got taught from a young age about non-judgment. It was pretty cool. We'd show up in our tie-dyed shirts and be completely the opposite, but I got along with my cousins and we understood that we were different, but I never had any non-judgment. So I never really had a lens like that with the church. So even when there was, I guess you could call them interesting circumstances, I was always just very accepting and non-judgmental of Mormons in general.
Okay. And thinking about your childhood, it sounds like the first thing you really got into was skateboarding, but that's more like kid stuff that gets serious later on. But early on, were you into gymnastics?
Yeah, I love gymnastics, man. It's so funny because I loved the foam pit and I'd hardly ever stick to learning any real routines because I'd always just want to have playtime and free time in the foam pit. And I did gymnastics for all combined, probably 8 or 9 years. And I can barely even do like a round off backflip. I can't even do back handsprings because I was always in the foam pit. That's all I wanted to do.
And you also, when you were a kid, had the roof jumping club. What was that all about?
I like it. You did some research. It was pretty random, man. I just would round up kids in my neighborhood, and I'm talking like first, second grade. And we go cruise around and try to find roofs we could climb up that had like a slanted landing. We called it an Akita roll. So, we'd jump off, a story probably was probably the max we were doing, but, we were like 8-year-old kids and we just land and roll out of it. So that was our club, and we'd always be roof hunting. It was great.
Were you the kid who was always breaking an arm or breaking a wrist or just getting bruises and bumps all the time?
I mean, I can't remember when I didn't have like a finger splint on from a sprained or broken finger or stitches. I was constantly banged up.
There was also a lot of team sports for you. I think it was soccer and basketball. There might have been football as well. And it sounds like you were on traveling teams with that. And that stuff can cost a lot of bread from what I've seen. What do your folks do to fund the life of Julian?
Yeah, I love team sports. I still do. I watch NBA and NFL pretty fanatically. I keep up on stats. That's probably a pretty random thing. I know tons of stats for NBA and NFL. But my mom was always the creative type doing event production. She was always creating things and selling them at arts festivals or helping produce arts festivals. My dad was a full-time musician and kind of switched from part-time computer scientist to he ended up getting his PhD in computer science and doing computer science full-time and doing music part-time. But he was always really supportive. Both of them were of athletics. They said if I was ever on an athletic team, they'd take over my car payments in high school. My birthday is in November, so I started skiing in 8th grade and they'd give me new skis and a ski pass for Christmas and birthday combined in those kind of formative years of my ski interest. So yeah, my parents, were typical middle class and they had an amazing childhood and they were able to support my whole interests from athletic standpoint my entire life. So I really appreciated that. And even growing up, my dad taught me, and rewarded me. I'd get $1 for every point I scored or every assist I got. So I always understood that kind of perspective from my dad was always be a team player and help other people accomplish what they want to do. And that's just as important as you doing it. So yeah, I think team sports is hugely formative to my character and I still love it.
And there's also skateboarding because that gets more serious for you too. I think by the time you get to middle school, like street skating happens and do you become an instant grom? Like does life become all about Jinko jeans and going spot to spot in Salt Lake looking for stair sets?
Oh yeah. That was my entire life for probably 2 to 3 years from like age 13 to 16. That's basically all I did was skate. And that's back when street skating obviously was huge. Vert was kind of dead. So I never did much vert. But yeah, I really loved skating. Obviously, the sport itself, I think, is one of the hardest sports on the planet, if not the hardest. But just the community around it, in how each individual is amplified, and it's kind of like a self-regulating, self-policing industry. So obviously jumping to the ski industry after skateboarding, there was a total lack of that. It was so dominant with corporations and like racer mentality that the idea of like personalities leading the ski industry was, just beginning. It was like the guys like, obviously Scott Schmidt were outliers and Glenn Plake and those dudes, and they kind of paved the path. And I'm sure there was guys before them, but it was obviously much different than the skate industry. So I think that's one of the reasons why I started the brand Discrete Clothing, just because I saw that everything had flames and lightning bolts on it. I just wanted something simple that, to me, remind me of like skate style,
Yeah, and when you are a skater and you're going spot to spot in your Jinkos, everybody looks at you like you're a dirtbag skate kid, I would think, because that's just kind of how skateboarders were treated back then. Did you ever get in trouble or harassed for being one of those kids?
I mean, every day we were out, we get chased by security guards and police. And back then in Salt Lake, cruising state was a big thing. And you'd skate the federal building that was on State Street and First South on Friday and Saturday nights. And so we'd get in big fights with all the cowboys and the jocks that would cruise by in all their caravans, because we'd be all the skaters hanging and representing at the federal building. I mean, it goes on and on. That was just my whole life for a few years there, but I loved it. I got free shoes from Etnies for a little while. I was pretty decent. I had a good bag of tricks, and, I can still bomb hills on my shortboard, got a solid ollie, still do my kickflip. Those are like my 3 benchmarks to still loving skating. It's still in my bones.
Oh, it's pretty awesome, man. And we haven't talked about snow yet, which is strange for one of my podcasts because I usually talk about snow right out of the gates. But you don't get into it until you're like your 4th or 5th grade. Your mom gets you a snowboard lesson and you never show up to that lesson or even end up a snowboarder. What's the story behind that first day on snow?
So I did make it. It was me and my buddy. We got our rental and our day pass, Brighton and Salty Peaks combo. The lesson didn't start till 11 a.m. My friend's mom couldn't drop us off till 9 a.m. Anyway, we get dropped off at 9 a.m. Our strict instructions, we're in 5th grade, as to not take a run until we wait for our lesson at 11 a.m. And of course, we don't wait. Of course, we just bomb. And first run, I get going pretty fast and I shit real bad. Twist up my knee, I hear it pop. And that's it. I get taken down on the toboggan. I end up on crutches. And yeah, I didn't touch snow again until 8th grade because my mom skied. And she finally talked me into it. And I kind of just went to like, all right, Mom, I'll go ski with you. Anyway, it's just funny because that first day skiing, it just clicked. I fell in love with it. I knew I'd do it the rest of my life. But it's just interesting looking back to that 5th grade moment, because if I wouldn't have sprained my knee that day, who knows if I would have fell in love with snowboarding the same way I did skiing, or maybe it would just have been something I tried and moved on. But I just know for a fact, if I wouldn't have gotten hurt that day snowboarding, I would never touch skis. No doubt about it.
So snowboarding makes you a skier, and from there on, you pretty much get hooked. And then when high school rolls around, I'm imagining that you define yourself as like a skate snow kid, but you have a jock side too. So is your room pretty much covered in like Thrasher and Powder cutouts and then like John Stockton posters?
Yeah, and Metallica. Don't forget Metallica.
Okay.
Yeah, nailed it.
Did you play team sports in high school?
Yeah, I played soccer and football, and I regret not playing basketball because that's probably actually what I'm best at. But I was more interested in skiing and more interested in partying, I guess. So I never really took it that seriously. I wish I would have a little bit. That's one of the things I look back at because I do love team sports and still play them frequently. But no, I fell in love with skiing, and that's all I was really focusing on in high school other than partying. And then once college started, I was not going to class that much and just skiing. I was 100% head down. I want to make it as a skier once basically I turned like 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, so when you go to college, you go to University of Utah for school. That's when skiing really gets real for you. It gets serious, and the industry's changing at this point. It's all fat skis, matchstick movies, and is it like right when you get to school, skiing becomes the #1 priority?
Totally. I just started following my buddy Rich Peterson around in high school, and he'd been skiing his whole life, really gifted athlete. He's actually insanely good at snowboarding and skiing. And he's the only guy, like, for people that ski Snowbird a lot, He's hit the moto gap on chips on skis and a snowboard. Only guy I know of that has done that, which is insane because it's kind of crazy to do it on either, but he's done it on both. Anyway, I have to keep up with him. And I didn't realize at the time that he was as gifted as he was. So I credit a lot of my fast track on skiing as being able to chase Rich Peterson around. And he's one of the lead guides up at CPG in Girdwood now. Still one of my best buds. Go see him at least once or twice a winter. And yeah, MSP movies were popping, TGR's popping, Freeze is going nuts, Powder's out there, Free Skier just starts. And, I'm religiously looking at every page and watching every movie. And all I'm thinking is, obviously, I'm loving what guys are doing. I'm psyched on it, but I'm also like, I think I can do all this. I want a seat at this table.
Yeah, skiing is super important to you, but you said partying was important to you as well. And you were in a fraternity in college, and that was a while ago. And there was hazing back then. What was the craziest thing that you saw that wouldn't fly today? Or what was the worst thing that happened to you during your pledge period?
Yeah, I was still in party mode, and I actually ended up being like the social chairman of my fraternity for a year, which is pretty awesome because I got a $2,000 open checkbook each month to produce a party.
Sick.
So that's probably the craziest thing, was that there's that kind of a budget for me to throw parties. But I think I just had an open mind. I didn't have any like parents or brothers or sisters that had done a fraternity. I'd had some friends that did. And so we found ourselves hanging out up in the fraternity area that summer before my freshman year. And I didn't even know the mechanics of how you rush or what a bid is or anything. I just knew all the stereotypes about a fraternity. And I just kind of hung around, and everyone I met were super cool. And then they gave me a summer bid. I didn't even ask for one. And I was like, I told my dad, and he's like, hey, if that's something that looks like fun to you, I'll support it financially, which was amazing. He also supported my college in general to pay for tuition. So major shout out to my dad. But I was like, well, there's all kinds of weird stuff I've heard about fraternities. If there's anything weird, I'm out. And so I just went in open-minded. And I think it's what I've done with my whole life, is I try to be aware of opinions and I guess preconceived notions. But I was like, I'm just going to fill this one out for myself, regardless of the weird stereotypes that are out there. But anyway, long story short, as like, an 18-year-old kid, this fraternity actually had these amazing lessons, I guess they taught you. And I guess now you could think it's cruel, but on Fridays, they'd line all 50 of us new pledges up for like 5 to 6 hours at a time. We couldn't sit down, and we had to like recite memorized material from like the founders of the fraternity for like what the place is based on. And it was like really valuable life lessons about, shaking people's hands, looking them in the eye, open doors for girls, being like a man of your word, having good integrity, being non-judgmental. And same thing, that fraternity was full of partier types like me and lots of Mormons. It was kind of like this big melting pot, but we all had non-judgment. And looking back, I was like, actually, it's crazy that the lessons they were teaching in that fraternity to 18 and 19-year-old kids was actually the exact opposite of what I expected. So it actually ended up being a great organization, a great experience. And yeah, getting $2,000 a month to throw a party was pretty badass.
Yeah, it sounds pretty amazing. And then you have the whole ski side of things. And what I found surprising about you and skiing early on is that you were entering slopestyle contests. How did that happen? And did you spend a lot of time in the park?
Yeah, I was just trying everything. And a buddy of mine at the time, Clark Fines, he's a pretty badass guide at large in the industry right now. He had just started kind of getting into it a couple years before me. I saw that he was already guiding like on Denali, and he's like a 19, 20-year-old kid.
Whoa.
And he's like, Julian, get the Bandit triple X's. So I got them. Obviously not any twin tip. The 1080s are out, but I'm going in the park and going off like the biggest jumps fakie on my triple X Bandits and entering slopestyle contests. And I was just trying it all. I was doing like the U.S. Free Skiing Nationals at the Bird. Same year, I'm trying the slopestyle stuff. And I definitely built a lot of kickers with the crew. I had a lot of snowboarder friends. So I'd be out building jumps with those dudes. And, the more I got into it, the more I started kind of finding a path of not doing much slopestyle and just really enjoying the steeps and soft snow and cliffs and whatnot. But I definitely tried it all for a few years there.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has been supporting the show for years. And they're your one-stop shop for all of your summer needs. Think inline skates, wakeboards, water skis, bathing suits, footwear, travel wear. Yes, and even though it's summer, Peter Glenn always has the best prices on ski and snowboard gear. And not only do they have all the brands, Peter Glenn has been getting people out there for over 70 years, and their knowledgeable staff will have you dialed with the right gear in-store. And online, they offer a 5-star shopping experience complete with free shipping over $50, a no-hassle return policy, and they will price match reputable dealers. So make sure you check out Peter Glenn before buying from anywhere else. And if anywhere else has a price that looks a little low, we'll price match it over at Peter Glenn so you can come support the show. To check out all the deals, head on over to peterglenn.com. Next up is Rollerblade, the brand that invented the sport of inline skating. And no one comes close to the fit, comfort, and performance of a Rollerblade branded inline skate. Whether you're looking for an ultra-supportive hard boot or a soft boot that features support where you need it, Rollerblade has the skate for you. And that's not all they have. For skiers out there, Rollerblade has created an award-winning skate-to-ski app designed to get your legs in shape for ski season or just to keep your ski legs in shape all year round. The app makes staying in shape fun, it's free, and it's available wherever you get your apps. And really, I can't say this enough about the sport of inline skating. Save your knees from running, save your bank account from biking, and pick up a pair of Rollerblade branded inline skates. Find all about all the skates, pads, and everything else over at rollerblade.com. Whether you're skiing, skating, biking, hiking, running at the skate park, doing yard work, or whatever, my next sponsor is the best way to celebrate a great workout or a great time without slowing you down. I'm talking about the best tasting non-alcoholic beer on the market, Best Day Brewing. 2023 is the year of the non-alcoholic drink. And for doers like you and me, midday beers don't cut it anymore. We've got to go out and pick up the kids, run errands, and go out and have more fun. And the safe and responsible way to do this is by not drinking alcohol. And you know what? Another thing I found myself doing with Best Day is that when I am drinking alcoholic beverages, I'll mix in a couple Best Days so I don't get too drunk and I can have fun all night. It's like I still feel like I'm partying because I am, but I'm only drinking like 60 calories instead of 300. It's amazing. Next time you're at the store, do what I've been doing and pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. My favorite flavor is the full-bodied hazy IPA, and I'd be curious to see what you like best. So when you pick up a 6-pack, drink it, and then shoot me an email at mike@thepowellmovement.com to let me know what you think about your new beer. To find out more about all things Best Day, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com. Those are my sponsors this break. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. I would say one of the more pivotal moments of your ski career was just a regular ski day. And I'm not sure how this works itself out, but one day you get to go skiing with a crew that has Gordy Pfeiffer, Dave Richards, and Micah Black in it. Absolute legends. And are you peppering those dudes with questions about how to make it in the ski industry?
Oh, totally. And Brant Moles was there too.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, it was the boys. And they were super cool, and they were about, the skill set that I considered myself until I skied with Gordy. We had like butt line passes at the Bird, and it was a POW day. So, there's like a 2 to 3 tram length line, and we just get a butt. And I probably skied 3 laps with Gordy Pfeiffer and tried my hardest to stay on his ass. And I'd never seen so much movement in someone's lower body and someone's chest remain squared downhill and have no movement. The guy was so good at skiing that it was kind of a reality check. I was like, okay, I need to grind. I need to become a better skier, because Gordy Pfeiffer just completely humbled me hard. But all of those guys were super cool, super open. And yeah, I was picking their brains like crazy. And they were like, look, just, build a website, enter contests, shoot with photographers as many as you can, find some filmers, and just move and shake, And from doing that, I tried to meet as many photographers as I could. And a lot of those guys are my friends now, like Adam Clark, Lee Cohen, and Will Wisman, Adam Barker, and the list goes on. And I also got an internship with MSI. So they were obviously producing all the free skiing events that I was entering. So it was really cool to be on the production side. And I ended up shattering my femur that year. So I was on crutches while interning for MSI, because I was planning on competing and interning, but instead I was just full internship, full production side of things while on crutches with this broken femur. But That was like Dave Swanwick, Adam Comey, and those guys are super cool. And I learned a lot about event production from that internship.
Gotcha. So I'm going to take you back to that day because those dudes inspire you to get a buddy to shoot photos of you because they're giving you insight on how to make it in the industry. You take those shots and you build a website before anybody else in skiing has a website. On this website, it says that you have major roles in film and television. I couldn't find those major roles in film and television. What are they?
Actually, that was one thing I tried as well when I was 19 years old was acting. And I got to be a stand-in for a month for Stephen Baldwin on, can't remember the name of the movie now, but I got callbacks for a couple lead roles, but acting's hard and I didn't find success in it. And I knew it would take just as much grinding to become a good actor as it does like a good skier. And I found that my natural talent at acting was not that great. And I thought it was kind of weird. It was a very strange dynamic. I applaud good actors. I still think it's a very strange thing that people are like super famous for. But yeah, I tried. I got some pretty cool stand-in stuff that was significant, but I never made it that far in that scene. But good research.
Well, the next thing for you is you see all of these skiers who are kind of getting older and they're kind of getting pushed out of the ski industry and they're leaving pretty much with bad knees and a good time and maybe a couple head injuries to tie it all together. When you think back to that time, who were the folks being pushed out, and was that the inspiration for you for starting Discrete, to create like a rider-owned thing that no one could ever kill?
I think after I made that first website, started getting some sponsors, things were coming together, and I noticed some of the biggest names in skiing were, quote unquote, getting old at the time. And back then, I guess you were considered old if you were turning like 30.
Right.
And some of these guys, I saw them, either bitter at the bar or I saw them pivoting and starting like a landscape business or going back to school and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with those paths, but I was just kind of in shock because I was like, man, these are some of the biggest guys that were absolutely on fire, biggest names in the industry. And I was like, okay, note to self, no matter how well this path goes that you're interested in, you should probably have something else going on. So financially, when your shelf life as a pro skier expires, you have something else going on financially that makes sense for you. So I started Discrete, and that was a crazy crash course in what it takes to actually run a business. I love the branding and marketing and product side of things, but just to straight up run a business. And this was back in like the 2007, 2008, that was a bit of an economic crash. So that's when we formed the company and had to develop some pretty strong habits to make it through that gauntlet. And yeah, it was like a 14-year project that I sold in 2019. But yeah, I think I just knew I wanted to start something, and I like being creative. So it was really fun to grow that company. And as I was, trying to carve out a little space for me in my ski career too.
When you start Discrete, is that before like the Coles and the Mellons and all those other headwear brands are out there? Are you the first of its kind headwear brand?
So at the time, Cole was maybe a couple years old. Spacecraft, same thing, was maybe a couple years old, but very niche up in the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, we were definitely by ourselves for the most part in the headwear category. And most brands, all the major brands that were making outerwear weren't making a beanie line like they do these days. So it was a very interesting little niche pocket to chase that made a lot of sense because, there was a big opportunity, especially in the ski industry, because Cole and Spacecraft are kind of predominantly snowboard. They're definitely ski too. And that's the same thing with Discrete. We were predominantly ski, but definitely wanted to be snow in general.
And the company, it takes some investment to start up. And investment's something that you can do even though you're not like a silver spoon kid. You're like this college kid who's working nights at a bar, putting together a brand, creating a pro ski career, being part of a fraternity. Does it feel like there aren't enough hours in the day to get everything done? Or is that how you always operate? Because it always seems like you're juggling way too many projects.
I definitely look back at that era. I was going to school full time. I was waking up for sunrise shoots. It seemed like daily because it was snowing a ton those winters. And then I'd haul ass down to the sports bar I was working at and work night shifts. And I didn't even have a laptop or a computer at the time. So I'd be sneaking into the manager's office to use their desktop. And then I'd go to the library at the University of Utah to use their computers to run Discrete. All the while I'm going to school full time, and it was a lot. But I found a nice pace that still kind of, I guess, governs my pace of life these days. And somehow it all just meshed together. And yeah, I find that I just always have so many interests, and somehow it all makes sense. There's definitely moments where I need to take deep breaths and untangle pretty massive to-do lists from so many different separate areas, but just one thing at a time, deep breaths, and, you know, it all starts to make a lot of sense, and I find a nice pace.
Okay. So in the timeline of life, you graduate college in 2004. So I think you're in school for like 7 years or something like that, but you're skiing the whole time as well. So whatever, that ends in a degree in economics, and I'm guessing with honors because I know you're a really smart guy. And you also leave with a personal website and Discrete, and you finally land your first sponsor. I think that's Smith. And this is where you had said that you had blown your femur up. You broke it into like 11 pieces. We could talk about that. We really won't. But I'll say, when you first get a sponsor like Smith, and then I feel like you might almost blow your femur the first day of the season too. I'm not sure, but I think it was early on in the year. And does it feel like a ski career that you're fostering and it's starting to build is almost like over before it even gets off the ground?
Oh yeah, that was very frustrating. And it was the first day of the year. I'd never taken preseason training more seriously in my life. The year before actually is when I landed my first sponsor. So this next year I had like 7 or 8 sponsors, and I felt like I was just going to kind of take over. I was like, this is it. This is my year. I'm going to train like crazy. I'm going to make all these sponsors super stoked, and I'm going to start landing movie segments, all that stuff. So anyway, first day of the year, crash on a pretty technical kind of double line, and yeah, shatter my femur in 11 pieces. And at that point in skiing, there was so much progression every year, and so much would happen each year that, man, it was insanely hard to watch an entire year go by, see all my friends progress, see the industry progress, while I'm laid up, you know, having to use a kickboard in a pool for 3 hours a day and spending 5, 6, 7 hours a day on physical therapy. And that was very challenging just as a human being, but it made me realize I needed to make better decisions. I was more of like the 99% guy. And if the 1% happened, I usually figured it out on my feet, or I'd have a really bad crash and I'd laugh it off, because that's what happens in skiing. You can have crazy crashes and you just get up and walk it off. Finally caught up to me. So I was like, you need to be a 100% guy, because I love life. I love being a healthy, vibrant human and want to live till old age. So that was really a huge development and progression, I guess you could say, in my character as a human. It made me realize what's important to me at large. And it made me realize I did love skiing and I did want to keep on that path. And so the next winter came around after spending, you know, an entire year grinding on physical therapy. I got back to 100% by midwinter the next winter. But it was a bit of a roadblock mentally to get back on my feet and get back to what it takes to progress and to be a part of that culture and be in that conversation as an extreme athlete. So it's just funny looking back that I'm grateful the injury happened, because it did lend huge insight to my decision-making going forward.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start with the award-winning Elan ski brand. I've been telling you about how amazing my ripsticks are, and how the whole Elan collection will make you a better skier, and how they won more awards than almost any ski brand out last year. Elan truly makes a better ski, and their new Playmaker series are worth looking into, especially if you've been waiting for a twin tip from Elan. It's here, and trust me, it's just as fun as my ripstick. And to tell you the truth, I'm lucky to have Elan supporting the podcast this summer. Elan doesn't need to support snowboard or summer episodes, but they support this show because they believe you need to hear the best content in snow, and they want to support me. So I'm asking you, when you're looking for skis next year, give Elan a try, and I guarantee you're going to become a believer. There's a reason why Elan's building a cult following in the States, and once you get on a pair of their skis, you'll realize why. They'll make you a better skier. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Next up, it's Stanley. And summer's finally here, and if you're like me, you like to get outside and go camping, paddleboarding, head to the beach, go adventuring. And to do all of that like a pro, I highly recommend heading over to Stanley1913.com. There, you're going to find all of your camping and adventure needs, along with that iconic water bottle that keeps your water ice cold and your coffee piping hot for hours longer than the competition. Stanley invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago, and they continue to innovate. And since I want you to have the best, I'm going to save you 30% on all Stanley products. All you need to do is head on over to Stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, use the code PMOVEMENT, that's all one word, all lowercase, and you'll get the best deal you find for Stanley on the internet. My final sponsor this round is Cascade Snowboard Camp. If you really consider yourself a great parent, you'll give the gift of summer snowboarding to your kid. This is your excuse to get the kids out of your hair and onto the Timberline Glacier at Mount Hood. Instead of having to plan the day for your kids, they'll have a plan of hot lapping top-to-bottom chairlift rides on real snow. They'll be getting expert coaching and making memories that are going to last a lifetime. If you want your kid to love you, you'll send him or her to Arbor Snowboard's signature session. The dates are July 23rd to July 29th, and your kid will learn to shred from pros like Eric Leon, Mary Rand, Hayden Tyler, Steffi Luxton, Mike Lydell, and Estelle Pensaro. It really is a life-changing experience that your kid will thank you for forever. And if you don't want to hook your kid up or you don't have a kid, don't forget about the adult camp. It's the perfect mix of expert coaching and adult activities. So treat yourself and come be a kid again this summer at High Cascade Snowboard Camp. You can find all about the kids and adult camps over at highcascade.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. You get yourself back being able to ski. And then that following summer, I think, is when you kind of hike out to Wolverine Cirque. That's where Jamie Pierre has made a big name for himself. And is that where you have an epiphany on what you need to do for big airs and cliffs? Is that kind of when that happens?
It was around that same time frame, yeah. Because I, for some reason, was just infatuated with the idea of going big. And obviously, up until that point, that guy Rob Holmes had that amazing spread in powder of him doing a huge front flip off like a 120-foot cliff in Glory Hold Alta.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being in shock, like, how does that make sense with the physics, with the impact, with the body mechanics, the air awareness? I don't know why I was just so impressed and so interested, but it seemed so impossible. And even before Rob Holmes, there was Scott Schmidt hitting 60, 70 footers, Glenn Plake and John Tremaine, and some of these OGs that have maybe hit 90 to 100 foot cliffs once or twice in their whole careers. Then suddenly Jamie Pierre comes along, and he is in every movie and every magazine. It seems like ticking off 100 footers, like a dozen of them every year. So he's an outlier. And I was like, how in the world did this dude get the cheat code? And if he can figure it out, I can figure it out. So it was the same thing when I wanted to go ski with Gordy Pfeiffer and Micah Black and them. I wanted to be able to touch and feel something to see where I was at. So I think my analogy or the same kind of idea of that was going up to Wolverine Cirque in the summertime and just sitting on the edge of the takeoff of that cliff that Jamie had pioneered. And that was a 150-foot cliff. He opens up his segment in TGR's High Life with it. And it's just mind-blowing. But he's just doing those kind of things over and over and over again. And I just wanted to cheat that code too. And it was interesting because the biggest cliffs I'd hit up to that point, I was maxing out at like 50 feet. And 50 feet's big. And I think, most people you hit a 25, 30 footer, you call it a 40 footer. You hit a 50 footer, you call it 70. I think that is really rampant in the ski industry. But to hit a true 100 foot cliff was insane. The consequences of doing it wrong, landing in the wrong kind of snow, not knowing what you're doing on the takeoff, like the consequences are so unbelievably high stakes. It's such an intense environment to be in. So just going up and putting myself in that environment, I just felt like maybe it would lend some perspective of just how intense that high alpine environment is to be on the edge of a 150-foot cliff. And over the next couple of years, I was still very infatuated. I just couldn't quite wrap my head around it. And then I finally did have an aha moment in those kind of 1 or 2 years. And I did routinely just put myself in those situations in the summer. I kept doing that for a couple of years. And finally, I kind of realized, I'm like, hey, when you're in the air off a 50-foot cliff, you're maybe in the air for like 1.5 seconds maximum. But I'm like, those 1.5 seconds last an eternity because you have so much time in the air. The ground's so far away. You're so aware of your body mechanics, your center of gravity. You have time in the air. And I'm like, well, if I could just have composure, like I can do really well at the 50-foot cliff for 1.5 seconds, if I can just be more composed for 1 more second with the increased speed that I'm falling through the air, that extra second of composure should lend itself to obviously more than another 50 feet because I'm falling faster. So I'm like, it should be getting me over that 100-foot range if I can just be composed for 1 more second. And somehow that resonated with me. It unlocked the mental block I had. My body made sense of it too. And I was pretty convinced that I'd figured it out. So the next winter comes along. We're up for sunrise shooting. And of all people, I'm with Rob Holmes. We're shooting POW, and I'm with Adam Clark, the photographer. And we nail some great sunrise shots way up on Cardiff. And we're coming down around the corner, kind of far lookers right of Hellgate. We're like mid-mountain, and we're skirting around what looks like, a cliff area. So I'm like, I'm just going to go take a peek up here. And sure enough, just to even get anywhere near the takeoff, I can tell, I'm like, holy crap, this is a giant cliff. And my heart's going crazy, and I'm just like, oh my God. And they're like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, well, let's go probe. So we go down and around, we probe. I mean, it was one of those days. It was just so unbelievably deep. The Abbey danger was good. The layers were great. And it was so, so, so deep. And I was like, oh my God, this might go. But every time I'd look up at the takeoff, up at the cliff, it was impossibly big.
Yeah.
Scared the shit out of me. But I went down there in the landing and I probed, and I mean, it was never going to be any better. The landing could not be any better. It was, 20 to 30 feet deep of snow with like 3 to 4 feet of blower. I mean, couldn't have been better. So I'm like, well, I'm going to hike back up there. Like, dude, take your time. Because they both realized that I'm about to potentially unlock the tough code to crack in the ski industry, which is going off a really big cliff. So they were like, dude, take your time, like go for it. So I start hiking back up, and something in me was like, dude, this is your last chance to have absolute certainty that this landing is good. So I went back to the landing, and I remember I just laid in the snow and just tried to like become, I know it sounds all hippie, but I was like, I want to feel the energy in the snow. So I like dug out kind of a pit to the side of where I wanted to land and just kind of laid myself in the snow, in the layers, and just like closed my eyes and was like, I need to become one with my environment. I need to become one with this snowpack. And after I did that, it did give me a nice sense of confidence, and that 100% kind of fear energy. I felt like some peace from this 100% certainty I had in the snowpack to land in. So I go back up to the takeoff and I start sidestepping towards the takeoff. And I mean, my heart is going crazy. Like, it's probably beating faster. I'm more scared than I've ever been in my whole life. And I sidestep back up. I almost point my skis down and around to go meet up with my buddies, because the only thing that went through my head was next time. Next cliff will be better looking, somehow it'll make more sense, like just next time, And so as I'm about to point my skis down, just something in me, I hit the brakes. And I was like, dude, if you're interested in this, there's never going to be a next time that makes more sense. This is always going to be intensely scary. I'm like, you have the skills to do this. The snowpack is a good landing. You need to go try to make sense of this and figure out why you're so scared, and see if you can calm down. So I backed up, sidestepped back into the takeoff, and just kept breathing. And I started to get some clarity in the one path on how to do it. And it made a lot of sense to me. It's like as if the one path illuminated for me. And it was really interesting because I'd never experienced it in life or in skiing, but this like intense, pure transformation from being 100% full of fear fueled my concentration, and bit by bit, I got more and more comfortable on this takeoff, and I transcended to 100% confidence in what I was about to do. And I'd never felt such pure clarity. And obviously the word confidence is the word I use, but it was just my breathing was calm. I knew exactly what I need to do. I visualized it so many times. And I felt like I was a part of my environment. I felt like I was a part of, the energy in the environment. And I knew with 100% certainty that I could do it. So I radioed down. I was like, guys, I'm a minute out. I'm doing it. And they were like, okay, like, we trust you. Sounds good. We're on standby. We'll be right down here waiting for you. And we'll be able to ski to you if you get buried and all that. And I was like, awesome. So I put away the radio. 100% clarity. It's kind of funny. I kind of laughed to myself because I was like, man, by this 100% rule that you came up with after shattering your femur, like, you'd be doing a disservice. You'd like be dishonoring yourself if you don't do this, because I am 100%. And I'm 30 seconds out, and this other crew that had been in the area up higher on the mountain shooting photos as well. Suddenly this one guy skiing down towards me. Shit you not, it's Jamie Pierre. He's like, hey, man. He kind of sees what I have going on.
You've never met him too, right?
I'd never met him. And I was like, oh, my name's Julian, like, oh, my name's Jamie. And I'm like, hey, man, what's up? Like, I know who you are, And he sees what's going on. He's like, oh, this looks awesome. He's like, can I hit it after you? And I was like, yeah, of course. So he's super respectful and gets completely out of the way. Doesn't make a noise, doesn't even speak again because he gets it that I'm getting focused again. So I refocus and I execute and I get out into the air. My center of gravity's never been better. The ground is impossibly far away. And, I gathered and figured out that the cliff that day was about 90 feet, almost double what I'd ever done before. But I nail it. I absolutely nail it. My body mechanics are perfect. Everything I visualized happens. And when I come into landing with the snow, I supremely relaxed. And since I was so deliberate and so intense, I'd never been more relaxed on the landing ever. And like I said, it was so deep. The only way I can explain it is that I didn't even feel it. Like, I did not feel an impact at all. And I actually skied away fluidly on that particular cliff. My skis didn't come off and I pulled off to the side and I just started laughing because I was like, okay, there is no limit on height. So obviously the next few years I went on a tear with cliffs and still try to get at least one in each winter that's 90 to 100 foot range. But that one cliff was so insane, such a crazy experience, but such a cool, affirmation to myself to follow my own insights, my own intuitions. And it's not like any other discipline in skiing where there's tons of guys before you and training and there's a carved out path on how to execute big cliffs. There's just a few other guys. And, I was really proud of myself and I was so excited because I was like, there is absolutely no limit to height. So that was a really, really intense experience and really awesome, formative couple of years there.
Yeah, because you start teeing it off, like you say. And I'd say the standout ones that happen right away are the 160-footer in Wolverine Cirque, the 140-foot invert contest record, and the 210-foot inverted one that you set in Engelberg. The first one earns you your first video cover and opening segment with Team 13 Echo, but some of your bigger film exposure parts were with Warren Miller. And how did you end up hooking up with Warren Miller?
I was out getting after it every day, so hungry. And I'd been shooting, one of my favorite photographers to shoot with was Will Wisman. And Warren Miller came through town and they hired him to be the photographer for the shoot for, the 2 or 3 weeks they were in town shooting. And the first day out, I can't remember who it was now. It might have been Chris Collins, got an injury. And they're like, okay, we got to get another athlete. And Wisman, to shout out to my boy, but he immediately was like, we have to get my buddy. And so they trusted him and they called me up and said, hey, you can shoot for the next few weeks. And yeah, it wasn't for me just being out there, right place, right time, and me already being so hungry and making those friends and alliances with guys like Wisman. Obviously that opportunity wouldn't have came. So there was a cool moment towards the end of the Utah shoot. I'd never been in a helicopter yet. And for the last day of the Utah shoot, they had Wasatch Powderbirds booked. And we'd already had so much fun for 2 straight weeks We'd already put a ton of stuff together. So I already knew that I'd have like a pretty strong showing in the film. But then I got an invite to go shoot with Rage Films up in Haines, Alaska. And I was going to be in the Bird with Kent Kreitler and Tom Ways as the guide. So I had this crazy experience, obviously, that year of having so many cool opportunities that I was like, wow, I have to make a decision right now of shooting a helicopter in Utah or going up to Haines and shooting out of a heli with one of my heroes, Kent Kreitler, So that was a very cool moment.
So you filmed with Warren Miller for a couple years, and I'm going to get the worst part of the podcast out of the way now. So you're skiing with Warren Miller, and it's a couple years after you started with him, and you have a horrendous knee injury. ACL, PCL, LCL, meniscus. You're lucky you didn't shatter your patella, I guess, but you destroy everything else. Your leg is just flopping on the side of a mountain. Do the doctors ever think you're going to ski again?
Yeah, that was intense. So I'd been so careful with my skiing, with that promise to myself to be 100%, that on this particular day, skiing with Warren Miller, it was like my second or third year shooting with them. We're towards the end of the shoot. I'd already done a lot of cool stuff, and we were up in like a far kind of side country of Honeycomb Canyon in Big Cottonwood out of the Solitude Gates. And I just had a very cool, big kind of open POW field beneath me, just to open up some GS turns on a big POW face. And there was one little rollover. And on the other side of the rollover, I knew there was one tree. And I was like, well, when I see the tree, I'll make an adjustment. So radio, it's my turn. I just start, going fast, making great, fun, high-speed POW turns. And I come over the blind rollover, tree is there, like no chance to make an adjustment. And I slam into it, knees to chest. I hear my whole knee rip apart. And yeah, you're right. I did ACL, PCL, MCL. The only thing I had left was my LCL, but I tore my calf muscle. It was bad. And yeah, and I thought my femur break was painful. This was even way more painful. And shout out to Solitude Ski Patrol. They actually the ones that hiked way out the side country grade to come get me. It took them about 2 hours. And by then I was getting pretty cold. I was starting to really shiver, and obviously had plenty of time to think about the path ahead because I'd already done it with my femur. And this one just seemed so much more serious because I heard and felt my entire knee go away. So we didn't know if it was like a tib fib and knee or patella, everything. So I was just kind of assuming that it was going to be all of it and got the MRI, did all the things. And yeah, the doctor, he's like, hey, I know the way you like to ski. And just to be completely transparent, I was like, I don't know if you're going to get back to the way you want to be. And so to hear that from that caliber of surgeon that worked on a lot of like US ski team guys was pretty intense to hear that from that kind of a doctor. And I just was like, hey, I basically have 4 things you need to fix that you've done to 4 different people, and they've all came back to be 100%, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, when you're in there, I'm like, take a break, go get a snack, but do each one of these 4 things and just think that it's a new human. And I'm like, I'll take care of physical therapy. And he's like, I like that perspective. And so after surgery, he came in the room, and my parents said, he just said, tell Julian when he comes to that I did my job. It couldn't have gone any better, and that I appreciated his insight about me refocusing as if it's a new person each time. But he's like, but tell him that I did my job. Now it's his turn. So I biked to physical therapy each day. I was there for 4 to 5 hours. Then I would bike to the gym, and I do upper body with my crutches. And then I would bike to either massage, acupuncture, Reiki, or Rolfing 5 or 6 days a week. So I would have a 9 to 10 hour day purely focused on healing, was drinking 0 alcohol, all organic food, and was doing like visualization techniques of imagining like running rivers of blood going through my ligaments. And I mean, you name it, I was doing it. That's all I wanted to do. So anyway, a year later, and still to this day, 100%. And that was definitely an injury that, again, to me, I was like, this surpasses the importance and how much I love skiing. This is my life. I want to live till I'm old, and I want to be athletic, and I want to have movement. And then I'm like, this is insane. Like, I have to do everything within my capabilities right now to ensure that I have a life of movement,
Yeah, well, you've got that going on, but I would say almost the worst part of this whole situation isn't even your injury. One of your best friends, Billy Poole, he's also filming with Warren Miller, and it's his first time filming with Warren Miller. He's fucking stoked. He's like the most fun, awesome guy ever. He's your best friend. He's Rachel's best friend. He's so many people's best friends. And he cartwheels through rocks and he loses his life. And this is pretty soon after you hurt your knee, right?
Well, yeah, that was a very intense couple of weeks in my life. I'd actually brought Billy on as a partner in Discrete. And, I think it was my third or fourth year with Warren Miller, now that I'm looking at the timing here. And Billy got on board with the crew. It's his first year as Warren Miller. He's fired up. And actually, rewind just a little bit more. I finally, just like 3 weeks before that, realized that I could quit my sports bar job in downtown Salt Lake because I was finally making enough income as a skier, 4 years into making things come together, that I was like, graduated college and I could quit that job and just focus on professional skiing. And we were out there side country Solitude before I hiked up to that line because he did something else. And we just laughed to ourselves. We were like, man, life is good. We have Discrete going. We're going to do our first trade show in a few weeks down at SIA in Vegas. And I was like, oh, wait. And, I just quit my sports bar job. And this is awesome. Life rules. So anyway, I hike up and, an hour later, I bust my knee and that's that. And then 2 days later, Billy's still out filming with Warren Miller and the crew while I'm dealing with my knee surgery. And I remember I was in getting, a doctor visit and I could hear my phone just blowing up, and came out and just saw missed calls from everyone that was a part of the shoot and saw voicemails like crazy. And I just knew, I immediately knew before talking to anybody that Billy had an accident. I just knew it. And I knew he didn't make it. I just knew it. I had something in my bones that told me that. And that was so unbelievably hard because to this day, him and I did so many cool projects and lines and cliffs together that we bounced information off each other. So that was hard to wrestle with for myself because I was like, man, I wish I was there to maybe be able to bounce some more information off him like we're used to doing so that we could both be our best selves on skis. And not to take any, obviously, abilities away from Billy. The guy is a freaking animal. He's probably one of the most capable, well-rounded skiers that have ever lived. So to say I had anything to do with it is obviously a stretch. Like, the guy was a freaking beast on skis. But it is when you have that dynamic with your ski partner, So yeah. That's just one thing I had to deal with. But him having that accident, my knee at the same time, I think that actually fueled my energy to heal. I was like, I have a chance to heal. Billy doesn't, and people kept calling me being like, oh, we're so sorry. I'm like, you don't need to feel sorry for me. Like, I can feel sorrow. Like, I can feel sadness. I can feel, like I can still feel things like Billy can't. I'm like, you don't need to feel bad for me. I promise you that. So I think I just ultimately, my piece with Billy, went and saw him in the hospital. And, I think there's millions of reasons to be sad about it, but I was like, there's so much mystery to life and afterlife or spiritual energy or, just what's going on in this crazy galaxy. I was like, there are an infinite amount of possibilities that I can't comprehend of what's happening with his spirit that I'm going to choose to celebrate, and find peace with this instead of just focusing on the sorrow and sadness for these things I know and can feel and touch. Like, I'm just going to celebrate his life and his energy, and that's kind of how I move forward with it.
Well, I'm really sorry for that loss because I know he was really, really important to you and to so many other people as well. I'm going to take us back to happier times. The next cliff I'm going to talk about is that record-setting 140-foot invert. That gets you the coveted Sick Bird Award at the Freeride Nationals at Snowbird. I feel like this might be the only award that you've won for your actual skiing. Other awards have been for like photos and other things that have played into it. Does that make this award mean a lot more to you, that it's for the actual skiing and being crazy one day?
Yeah, I think being a part of the greater competitive kind of culture was really special. And at the time, obviously, all the Europeans were coming over, so there was a very cool international attendance for those events back then. And yeah, typically when I'd be out on a film project, putting together lines or cliffs, any other big cliff I'd ever hit was like in a very remote location and with a small group of people, So to suddenly be in a competitive environment and obviously had to qualify to get in the event. So, I mean, I felt like I was just skiing really well in general at that time. And somehow the storm patterns came together, and it all led to me having the opportunity again to go down a very intense path of figuring out how I could do that cliff. And that was also another very intense, it was like a 4-day study that went into finally getting to that 100%, because I was not at 100% for up until about an hour before it was my run. I had my plan B run. And anyway, I could go on, but my aha moment was the whole landing area in this particular venue in Silver Fox, kind of the side of Great Scott, right underneath the trim towards the top at Snowbird. Usually they open Great Scott and people ski through the landing of this big cliff that's kind of splits. They call this area Hanging Bowl. That's part of Great Scott. And then North Chute, and it connects over to Silver Fox. And there's this huge disc. It looks like a UFO crashed into the mountain. And the idea, I wanted to go off the top of the disc. So I go from North Chute into Great Scott. And, it was definitely, I knew it was 100, 120 feet. And never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I'd be able to do this cliff, because I'd stare at it every time I'd ride the tram, because you can look right down on the takeoff every time you ride the tram. And like I said, they'd always open the landing on Great Scott, normal skiing kind of protocol for the way they have boundaries and open the resort. So there'd be moguls in the landing by the time they'd open up North Chute where the takeoff is. So it was always like a fantasy cliff. So the contest is coming to town, and they close that entire side of the mountain. So nobody's skiing through the landing for like 2 weeks. And a bunch of storms come in, qualifiers go off. Pretty sure I got 5th in qualifiers. I skied a line that my buddy Tyler Knowles actually skied to get podium a couple years earlier. It was like this really cool triple exit down towards the bottom of that venue. And so I'm psyched. I'm in the big show. I'm fired up. And storm comes in. They weather delay the start of the event for a couple days. And, those 2 days going into the landing of the UFO and probing, the depth is there. And there's just a little bit of firmness on top. And that night before the day the contest goes on, it's supposed to snow like 2 to 3 feet. So I'm like, sweet. If it snows 2 to 3 feet on top of a tiny little bit of a firm layer, and then it goes really deep again, I'm like, it should be perfect, because it will get cold, and this kind of firm layer should fuse with the rest of these layers pretty well. Anyway, that night it only snows like 5 to 6 inches. So I go up there in the morning for inspection run. And again, it's like some fluff on top of a pretty firm layer that I kind of had to bang with my pole to break through it. And then it would go full depth, like full go time. So it was just this weird little layer that I wasn't comfortable with. Other than that, the depth was all there. And I'd already figured out the takeoff. I already figured out the trajectory and the horizon lines for what to look at. All the other athletes are just asking me if I'm going to hit it. And I'm like, I don't know. I really don't. I'm like, probably not. But I put everything I had into studying it. And I watch a few guys ski their lines, and it gets to be my turn. I'm like, okay, I got to ski down, take the tram up, and go get in the start gate. And as I'm in line for the tram, I'm by myself. And I'm sure you remember, and I'm sure a bunch of the people listening will remember, but Simon Dumont had a really bad accident on a park jump they built at Park City around that same time.
Yeah.
2008, 2009. And he hit this kicker at like 7:30 in the morning, going like 60 miles per hour, got like 90, 100 feet in the air, completely overshot the landing and landed on like, an icy groomer from 90 feet. Broke his hip, ruptured his spleen. I don't know what his laundry list of injuries were. But finally, I just realized at that moment, I was like, that's how you get hurt. I'm like, you fall 100 feet to ice. That's how you get hurt. I'm like, I'm not even going to feel that little tiny ass layer in this deep ass snow. I'm like, I will not even feel it. This is not how you get hurt. That's how you get hurt. You fall 100 feet to ice. I'm falling 100 feet into deep ass snow with a tiny little layer that ain't gonna do shit. So I finally felt that 100% clarity that I knew I had to feel to do those kinds of things. So I went up into the start gate, and when it got to be my turn, they brought me out to go 3 different times, and then they called a weather delay. So it was just funny because I was already kind of used to that from shooting photos and waiting for light. So it didn't shake me at all. I was already used to it. But after I busted that out, again, I didn't even feel that landing. It was like nothing. Didn't feel a thing. But the noise, like I was so in tune, so in like a meditative trance that as my ski did come off when I landed, unfortunately, so I got a DNF because my ski came off. But as I was gathering my ski, put it back on, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, oh, it's noise. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in a contest right now. This is crazy. So it felt like, people were applauding me like draining a three for like the NBA finals or something. So to go from usually being in a remote place with a small group of people into a competitive environment with a lot of people was a pretty unique experience that, is an awesome, awesome thing I got to do.
I feel like you had a similar type of feeling again later in your career at Whistler with Air Jordan. And that one's not a contest by any means, but it's like a double stager. Most people take it as a double if they have the balls to hit it. But you take this double as a single, so it's 185-foot air. And with that one, you've got 200 people down in the maze looking up at Air Jordan at all times on this powder day. And there's probably like another 100 people lined up on the mountain, either waiting in line to hit a different cliff or to see what you're doing. So I'm thinking that there's probably more pressure than ever on you to hit a cliff like this. There's all these people waiting, looking, watching. Is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? Does that make it more hair-raising than ever, just when all these people are looking at you?
By that time, that one was like 6 or 7 years ago, but I had gotten so used to my protocol on how to do big cliffs that I knew my script of how to accomplish them. So all the externalities, were certainly things I needed to manage, but they weren't overwhelming. And that one had a lot of externalities. It was actually the last day we were shooting for that entire Whistler segment with Sherpas. And I'd been up there for pretty much 6 or 7 weeks. So we'd been shooting a ton. And I came up there from a pretty lackluster winter in Utah, and they were having a good winter. They had a ton of base. So I was just like licking my chops because there's so much snow that I just started trying to hit every cliff I could find, and I'm having a blast with this whole crew of Whistler locals that maybe some of them I could call friends, but I got to know all of them really well from the shoot. So that was really fun. And same thing with Air Jordan. I'd never even stood on it. The whole 7 weeks I'm up there, my eyes would travel over to it because I'd always just look at the takeoff from the top. And I'm always like, same thing as the 140-footer Snowbird as like just kind of a fantasy cliff. I like to look at all opportunities when I'm, out in a mountain range, just what the possibilities are. My eyes always go to like the biggest cliff. I think literally going back to me being a kid, foam pit, like I just was so into the fun of jumping into foam pits that it kind of never changed. And by the time that Air Jordan thing came up, I'd done enough professional productions around the big cliffs that, I was very comfortable in the ability to say no, because I'd had to say no in pretty intense circumstances where it took a big crew a long time to get out to places and having to say no. And so there wasn't any question, and I didn't feel any pressure. And it was funny because they closed the entire mountain the day before for a full day because it was such a big, nasty storm, and they're calling for 40 to 50 inches. And so that night before we do it, we can see the stars finally. So we know it's going to be blue the next day. And I'm staying with Dave Mossop, one of the Sherpas founders. And I was like, hey, obviously tomorrow's like one of those days that you can stack a ton of footage and get a lot done because it's going to be full blue, no wind, untracked upper mountain, and they have access to early chair and all that stuff. So I was like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to go look at Air Jordan with the possibility or the intention of singling it. And I'm like, I know you have a lot you can do. I'm like, do it. I'll just be over there checking it all out, and I'll keep in touch with you on the radio to let you know how it's looking. And I'm like, and also, if you don't want me to waste my time because it's such an important day to get a lot done, like I'm happy to do whatever you want to do. If that doesn't align with like how you want to be productive,
Right.
And he's like, dude, go take a look, take your time. We will shoot stuff in the area. We'll be nearby and just keep me posted. He's like, you take all the time you need. So same thing. I mean, it's just so intense to go get to the takeoff, just anywhere near it. It was so scary. I like cliffs to be sheer. Like I want them to be straight down. And that cliff from the top rope travels. Like you have to get out.
You have to hit it with speed.
Oh, you have to clear a bunch of trees. because it is normally a 2-stager. So you have to get way out there to clear the whole cliff. So I'm just full alarm bells, full scared, the whole thing. And I'm like, okay, you know the drill. Sure, this is scary to be up here, but you need to go down there further and look off the takeoff. And you need to assess if it's possible or not. That's what you're up here for. You're not up here to decide if it's scary or not. You already know it's super scary, but you need to go to the edge of that thing and look. Like, you have to see if it's possible or not. Because obviously when you go look at big cliffs, there's so many things that are apparent that make it not possible. And then you leave, right? And you move on to the next project or the next zone. And that happens all the time. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go out to this takeoff. And it's so scary to sidestep out to this takeoff. And I get to the takeoff and I make a hard assessment of everything it will take to build the in-run, clear this rock, clear that tree, get right, land in the right spot down there. And I was like, son of a bitch, it's doable. Like, it's possible. I was hoping that it would be a no-go. I was just hoping that there's something that would be like, nope, this isn't possible. But instead, I was like, nope, it's possible. I'm like, all right, go down the landing. So I carefully sidestep out of there, ski around the landing. Oh, and I should say, this local guy, Christian, that I've made friends with, I told him, I was like, because we got on the chair like 10 minutes before public. And, on this kind of a morning, there was like 2,000 people online.
People are frothing for that cliff.
Oh, they're frothing. And so I was like, hey, Christian, guys are going to show up soon. We know that. I'm like, just explain to them that I'm having a look at singling it. And if they'd respectfully wait to do the double until I do the single, or at least decide if I'm going to do it or not. But as of right now, I have the intent to do it. So I'm going to obviously go probe. I'll report up to you what I see. And, I go probe and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go haul ass to the chair and come back up. And I'm like, if you can just ask people to wait. I'm like, if someone doesn't want to wait, I'm like, that's fine. This is just as much their mountain as it is mine. But I'm like, if you can please just explain to them, because I hate being that guy. You know what I mean? Like, there's no room for that really. But I was like, at least ask and they can make the decision. And if they say, fuck it, I'm going anyway, like, I respect that, So everyone waits. And by the time I come back up and around, there's like 14 bros that are chomping at the bit to get the double. But they were all like, yo, Julian, hell yeah, take your time, bro. Like,
that's so cool.
Holy shit, dude. Yeah, so they were just hanging out, watching. And it took me like an hour and a half to get the in-run put together and wrap my head around it. Because same thing, it was just so intense. It was so scary. It was by far the fastest I've ever had to hit a cliff, like double the speed I've ever had to go off a cliff. So there's just so many things that went into it. And then we also coordinated about 50, 60 skiers off to the left that were going to ski at the same time. And then Stan Ray was going to hit the double proper at the same time that I hit the single. So there's a lot to orchestrate between the additional skiers off to the left and then Stan Ray and me and timing all of that. And obviously there's like 3 cameras that are set up. So that's also part of the, I guess, enjoyment I get out of being a professional skier is I like production and I like those kind of logistics. So it's really interesting to get calm and focus on, this athletic thing I'm about to do. And then also realize I'm, at a part of like a, production, and that I need to be able to communicate clearly about what I'm going to do while maintaining like a level head, So that was awesome because my ski didn't come off. I skied away instantly. Stan Ray and I give like the craziest high five we've ever given. And that was a very, very insane day. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. Like, that was awesome. That's a nice feather in the cap to close this whole experience of Whistler for the 7 weeks for this movie. And then our buddy, Matt Elliott, he's like, there's another cliff down the ridge that's like a 60, 70 foot cliff, and they call it Demansky's. And he's like, hey man, I just hit Demansky's and I kind of over rotated this backflip. So I'm going to go back up and hit it again. There's plenty of room on the takeoff. Come with me and we'll go off at the same time. And I was like, oh, why not? So went back up. Sherpa's got like this crazy boom, like 20-foot crane extender that followed us off this cliff. And, he did this backflip and I did the front flip tandem. We went really far off of it. So it definitely was probably in the 80, 90 foot range of air. So anyway, that was a very radical day to be able to kick off the single in Air Jordan. And yeah, that was cool. I got a note from Treadway later that day, and he's like, "Nice work, buddy. It's awesome to see you pull that off." So
Nice.
I love going to Whistler now because, it is in the ski scene. You can, have a lot of friends and make a lot of inroads and be part of the ski industry culture and live a obviously normal life at large. But whenever I go to Whistler, there always is whispers like, "Oh shit, that's Julian. That's the guy who did the single." So I always love going to Whistler.
That's awesome, man. Well, listen, at this point, we've been going for a long time and we are not finished with the podcast by any means. I'm wondering if I can get you on the hook for a part 2 of the podcast, maybe recording next week.
Yeah, I think that should work. I'm around for the month, so that works for me.
Awesome. Well, you're not off the hook yet because I end every show with something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. This time around, it's time for you to get paid back because I believe you asked Rachael Burks her 3 inappropriate questions. I can't really remember, but I think you did. And I was able to get Rachael to ask you 2 inappropriate questions. She knew the assignment was for 3 inappropriate questions, but she only recorded 2. But here's the beauty of what Rachael did. Her first question is a 5-parter, and then her second question is a 2-parter, so you really have 7 questions. So I'm going to jump into question number 1 from Rachael right now.
Julian, you have a tendency to take things that are pretty standard for most people, like things that you don't even really think about that are just part of everyday life, but then putting your own spin on it and making it as though it's your own new creation. So I would love if you would tell a story or explain the following. 1, scrunch face. 2, the push burp. 3, twiskies. 4, peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates. Or 5, you can tell them what drink you made for my New Year's Eve party.
And so I can walk you through these really quickly, and then you can just you don't have to give us really long stories by any means. But number 1, scrunch face. What's that?
Oh, it's just when you're having a good time and, you just scrunch your face up, and it can be an answer to someone's question. It can be you asking a question without actually saying anything. It can be a dance move. It's just a mentality. Just scrunch the face up and get amongst it.
All right. Push burp. How about that one?
Next time you burp, just give out a little push out of your diaphragm too. So you get a little half little volume from your voice plus the burp. So it's a really nice amplification technique for a quality, crisp, loud, obnoxious, offensible burp.
Perfect. Twiskies.
Twisky, equal part, 1 shot whiskey, 1 shot tequila in 1 shot glass, down the hatch.
Oh, peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates.
When I was in 7th grade, I was in this choir singing, and to get into the range before a show, you would sing starting from a really high voice to a low voice, peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates. And when we were out on river trips with Rachael and for her birthdays up in Idaho, somehow we'd get the 2 or 3 boats, all 10 people would start singing peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates. It's hilarious.
Can you sing it for us so we know how that goes?
Peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates. Peaches, pears, plums, and pomegranates. And you can imagine going all the way to the high.
Okay. And then what drink did you make for Rachel's New Year's Eve party?
That would have been a Yale-Gill Skeeto. So a Yale-Gill Skeeto is Jaeger, gin, tequila, whiskey, mojito.
Jesus Christ, man. Your taste buds must be totally fucked.
Or refined.
Or refined, yeah. So we will jump into Rachel's second and final question. I believe there's 2 parts, but there might only be 1. I can't remember.
Julian, it is a known fact that people can scroll through any photo of you taken over the last probably, I don't even know, maybe 15 years, and they cannot find one photo of you without your finger raised. And I think it started with, give me your best number 1, but could you please provide a little insight behind the please give me your best number 1?
Now, I haven't gone through all the photos by any means, but if you do scroll through your Insta or anything, is that what I'm going to see? Is your finger up in every photo?
Same thing. It's like a default pose for any kind of picture. It's also a dance move. Just hold number 1 up and move your feet around. But really, the kind of undercurrent to what that actually means is I love hiking peaks. So it means get to the top.
All right. Well, there we go. So when you see Julian in photos, he's always saying, let's get to the top. And Julian, that's Inappropriate Questions. That's part 1 of the podcast. And your life and times have been amazing. There's still so much more to talk about that I'm not going to spoil any of them. So for right now, I just want to say thank you for your time, and I will talk to you next week.
Dude, pleasure being on the show. Can't wait for round 2, man. Appreciate it.
So that was part 1 with Julian Carr. And I find it so interesting how Julian's able to get all hippie and pretty much make himself become another charged particle in the big cliff environment. I mean, it's crazy. If you've ever stood on top of a 50-footer, you know how scary that looks. When I've stood on top of a 50-footer, I've looked for a way to get around it because I'm not that crazy and I don't have that big of balls. But Julian, he sure does. And I can't imagine what goes through his mind when he's standing on something 3 times as tall as a 50-footer. But Julian makes it sound like it's all about that calm demeanor, which even to get into a state like that is a skill within itself. Holy shit. And we talk more about cliffs and the rest of Julian's life and times next week. At this point, I want to thank you for listening and ask you to please review me wherever you listen. And if a review or a social post that you put up is good enough, I'm going to read it on the air. And if I do, you're going to win a limited edition Powell Movement prize. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for supporting my incredible sponsors who make this show happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Rollerblade, Elon Skis, and High Cascade Snowboard Camp. Have a great week, everyone.